Creatine is arguably the most important nutrient for energy production in your skeletal muscle, your brain, your eyes, the cilia in your ear, and also the placenta. In today's show, we're going to talk about how creatine helps your cells make energy and also is an indirect antioxidant. Now, I know creatine is really popular for people that go to the gym or want to build muscle or do CrossFit or high rocks, but you should really consider how creatine works in your body and is vitally important for the formation of cellular energy. Now, I want to go back to 2011 and talk about this paper titled The Creatine Kinase System and Pleiotropic Effects of Creatine. Okay, so creatine is vitally important for cellular energy production. Creatine is also an indirect antioxidant because it turns out that creatine is an energetic buffer, especially in energetically demanding tissues, such as the photoreceptors in your eye or the retina, such as various cells within your brain, particularly the glial cells. Creatine is really important for various cells in the brain. Creatine is also vitally important, of course, in skeletal muscle, which is why bodybuilders and athletes have been leveraging creatine as an ergogenic aid for the better part of 30 years. But we now know that creatine is vitally important for making cellular energy. So what I want to do is share with you a presentation that I gave to folks in Scandinavia this past weekend over at Copenhagen Health Week. I will link some of this, and I will give you access to all of these slides if you opt into our email newsletter, which will be linked in the description below. So if you want access to this, I previously gave this only to Myoscience customers, but I'll give this to you for free if you want to join our email list, where we also give out our blood work cheat sheet, and I send you a newsletter once a week with really good information. So really important to acknowledge that creatine is a vitally important nutrient that helps with cellular energy production, because it turns out that your body can only store between 80 to 100 grams of ATP in any given moment. So ATP, adenosine triphosphate. If we want to think about cash or currency in the economy and relate that to cellular energy, for example, let's just say your wallet can only hold maybe a couple $100. I mean, most people have small little wallets. You can't just have like thousands of dollars. So if you want to go buy a car, let's say, or you want to go buy something expensive, maybe an engagement ring for your partner, right? You're not going to have $13,000, $14,000 of cash in your wallet. Cash is like ATP, and drawing money from your bank account, whether it's a electronic transfer, a wire transfer, or a credit card. That is how creatine helps in a sense. It's a buffer of cellular energy. So when you're constantly moving your muscles during intense or vigorous exercise, or you're trying to focus on building your business or learning a new task, or you're at a concert, actually, creatine is vitally important for the energetically demanding cilia within your ears that help you hear, and also the photoreceptors within your retina. And also if you're pregnant and creating a baby human, creatine is vitally important for helping to energize the placenta and the growth of the placenta. So really important. So creatine, as you can see from this image here, it's an energetic reservoir. That's what it is. So when people say creatine builds muscle, it helps you indirectly build muscle because you have better workouts, because you have more cellular energy. And the reason why higher doses and dosages of creatine is helpful for the brain and overcoming sleep deprivation and or jet lag, and possibly even helping in depression and Alzheimer's disease, is because we know that depression and Alzheimer's are conditions characterized by energy defects within the brain, particularly the mitochondria and beyond. And it turns out, as you can see from this slide right here, this is figure 1. Once you understand this concept, I'm telling you how you view creatine will change for the rest of your life. So what you're looking at here is the foundational mechanism of action by which cash or ATP in your body is made. And this is the respiratory chain in the mitochondria. As you can see here, CR stands for creatine. PCR stands for phosphocreatine. So creatine is phosphorylated, and that phosphorylation of creatine can help remake energy by giving a phosphate group to ADP to make ATP. So ATP is what you use to move your muscles, to contract your muscles. It's what I'm using right now to articulate my thoughts and convey them verbally to you. It's what you're using to hear what I'm saying and to conceptualize this in your brain. ATP is very important. You're using it all the time. In the context of cognitive decline, depression, anxiety, situations where you have sleep deprivation, like you travel, for example. By the way, I had a red-eye flight over to Copenhagen, and so I took 20 grams of creatine before my presentation, and it was like my brain was on. So higher dosages can really help maintain executive function in the context of sleep deprivation, and also in the context of depression, because we know that depression is linked with decline in terms of cognition and executive function and beyond. And that's why I'll share with you later this study right here that showed that in individuals in the UK that were depressed, that were receiving cognitive behavioral therapy, when they were given creatine high dosages, I think it was 10 grams a day, for 8 weeks, they had an improvement above and beyond the group that only received cognitive behavioral therapy. We also have a small pilot study in individuals with Alzheimer's, finding better word retrieval and better executive functioning and word recall, giving those individuals 20 grams of creatine over the course of 12 weeks. So higher dosages have, it turns out, not only performance applications for athletes and people who exercise, but also improvements in cognition, because it turns out that higher dosages of creatine indirectly reduce oxidative stress in the body and increase the mitochondrial production of ATP. So this is important. Now, trust me, there's tons of nutrients out there and all these supplements designed to optimize the mitochondria, right? Back in the early 2000s, when I got into this business, there was all this talk of resveratrol and alpha lipoic acid. And these were the quintessential nutrients that we should put this stuff in the water, right? Everyone was talking about this. David Sinclair at Harvard had just published some research in animals about resveratrol. So this was really hot. Then over the years, we heard a lot about ketones, and I think ketones are amazing. But even more foundational to cellular energy production above alpha lipoic acid, resveratrol, now we have NMN and NR to increase NAD and the ratios there. And there's erythrin A, there's all these things. Folks, creatine on a gram per gram basis is much more affordable than all those nutrients that I mentioned, but it helps the widest array of tissues in the body: your muscles, your brain, your eyes, your ears, placenta, and beyond. So really important, because we also know that if you're building your business, if you have a young family, you're up at night, your sleep might not be optimized, especially as it gets closer to, the winter solstice and so forth. Nights are much longer now. Sleep often gets compromised for a lot of us because we're on screens and so forth. Creatine can really help optimize brain function in context of sleep deprivation. But I think it's really important that it's an indirect antioxidant, because people take, vitamin C or vitamin E or coenzyme Q10, these antioxidants. But if you optimize your creatine levels, guess what? This is an indirect antioxidant, because you're making the respiratory chain more efficient in your mitochondria. Now, where do you find your mitochondria? In your liver, in your brain, in your muscle tissue, in your heart tissue. So mitochondria are really important. About 10% of your body weight is from your mitochondria. These are organelles, or the way that I think about an organelle, if you think about your house like a cell, your furnace could be, say, your mitochondria, right? So within your house, you have your dishwasher, your appliances like your refrigerator, your hot water heater, and furnace, and so forth. So the mitochondria is a piece of your cells that is vitally important. We know that mitochondrial dysfunction and mitochondrial apoptosis and mitophagy and all these processes really affect cellular health and cellular energy. And as you can see here, multiple lines of evidence suggest that creatine is vitally important as a mitochondrial nutrient. Now, I just want to pause. There's a lot of creatine options out there, my friends. And as you know, I do have a conflict of interest. I have a supplement business. And the reason why I have a supplement business is honestly to help you and my clients, because there's so many garbage supplements that are out there. I've been in this space for 19 years. I've seen tons of trash, tons of crap. I've been to many contract manufacturing facilities, and I'm quite honestly grossed out by them. So we started our very own, and creatine is one nutrient that we source exclusively from Europe, and we offer you some of the best in the world at highly competitive prices. We now have the ultra pure, this is a CreaPure creatine monohydrate in stick packs. We have it as a standalone. We have it enhanced in electrolytes. And we also have the micronized Creapure, known as Crea Vitalis, in a bag, a 75 serving bag. So a wide array of options that are very competitively priced and made in small batches more frequently. Most companies, what they do is they'll buy like 10,000 bottles of something and it'll sit on the shelf for about a year before you actually get it. We do small batches every quarter to ensure that you're getting the freshest raw materials. Everything is third-party tested for heavy metals, for potency, and for micro, as well as contaminants. So clean products that you can confidently use and benefit from. So you can save with the code podcast over at myoscience.com. I'll put links in the description below. Now, here's a quote that I want to read to you. The investigators say, this important phenomenon termed creatine-stimulated respiration. Now, what does respiration mean? As we continue to look here at figure 1 of this paper, mitochondrial respiration. So this is the ability of the mitochondria to take the oxygen that you breathe and the foods that you eat and combust those into cellular energy, which is exactly why we breathe. You know, this process of breaking down fats and carbohydrates to make cellular energy, you know, we use the oxygen that we inhale and the carbon dioxide that we exhale. That's literally the byproducts and the starting raw materials to make energy. This is why we eat food as well. And it turns out that creatine stimulates the mitochondrial respiration. So it actually is foundational to initiating this process of taking, again, oxygen that you breathe and the foods that you eat to making cellular energy. And they say this process is entirely dependent upon the presence of mitochondrial creatine kinase. And so this is really important because this also creates an indirect antioxidant effect in the mitochondria, which, as you know, unhealthy mitochondria can be a source of pro-oxidation and increased release of free radicals. So really important stuff here from this paper. There is a table here highlighting the pleiotropic effects of creatine for cellular function and cell protection. Some of these go on to talk about how creatine improves cellular energy state and muscle performance. Creatine facilitates intracellular energy transport. Creatine improves the efficiency of cellular energy utilization. Creatine stimulates mitochondrial respiration, as you just heard. And I think this is really important for people of all ages, of all walks of life, especially in tissues of high energy demand. The eyes, the ears, the brain, skeletal muscle, heart muscle, and the placenta. Now, I think a lot of people have this idea that creatine is only for young athletes. Well, we have this paper right here titled The Power of Creatine Plus Resistance Training for Healthy Aging, Enhancing Physical Vitality and Cognitive Function. So as you can see here, creatine is beneficial for people of all ages, especially people over the age of 65, because it turns out that as you get older, you become a little bit more insulin resistant. Your mitochondria aren't as efficient at making cellular energy. So it's theorized that higher dosages of creatine, both from whole foods and also from supplements, might help people over the age of 65 in particular. And this paper highlighted how creatine supplementation is safe, beneficial throughout lifespan, and should not be restricted for children and also even people of older ages. So here is this paper is from the Creatine Global Consortium. There's a lot of independent research groups that are highlighting the importance of creatine. What's really interesting here is, there are cerebral creatine deficiency syndromes. And so these are people that have genetic aberrations in creatine transport proteins. And remember that creatine is an amino acid that's made mostly, within your cells, mitochondria, and in the cellular cytosol by combining the amino acid glycine, methionine, and arginine together. It's specifically more tethered to nitrogen or arginine metabolism, having glycine in there. So obviously amino acids are really important. I love glycine. I think you should consider glycine as well. But research does show that when glycine and arginine come together with the methionine backbone, that's how creatine is synthesized. Your liver makes it, your kidneys make it, and your glial cells in your brain make creatine. But, we need at least 1 gram per day. And so if you're not getting omnivorous foods, then we're just relying upon endogenous production or your cells making creatine. And some of these plant source foods don't contain ample amounts of arginine or glycine. So that being said, people young, small humans, babies and toddlers and so forth, who have genetic defects in creatine transport proteins and creatine kinase enzymes, tend to have more issues regarding to brain dysfunction. So this is how we know that creatine is really important in the brain. So these so-called cerebral creatine deficiency syndromes are linked with mental retardation, impaired learning, and word retrieval and word recall. So this is how we know that creatine is really important. But obviously, we've talked about energy demanding tissues. Kids are expending a lot of energy allocated towards growing. My daughter grew like 4 inches almost this summer, right? So it's like, I'm giving her creatine, giving her whole, raw milk and egg yolks and red meat and things like this to help fuel her growth. So that, she can achieve her biologic potential. And so, when you're growing, you're expending a lot of energy and allocating that towards growth and towards neurodevelopment and bone development and so forth. And so this is why, creatine containing foods are really important for kids, and especially athletic kids as well, ensuring that they have adequate creatine in their diet and possibly supplementing around exercise. And that's really where I want to sort of finish off here, is like the tactics and strategies. This was a lot of the questions that I received over at Copenhagen Health Week after the fact, where people are like, well, how much creatine should I take and for how long? Well, this is what the research really shows, and this is what we've been doing since the first time I took creatine, I remember, was 1998. I can't remember the brand, but it was paired with dextrose and creatine monohydrate, and we were told to take 20 grams per day, but it had 4 parts of dextrose to every 1 part creatine. So you take 5 grams of creatine, it was 20 grams of dextrose. So you can imagine you're taking 20 grams per day. It's almost like 100 grams of just simple carbs. And people had all sorts of water retention and fluid imbalances from just that much simple carbs. And now we know it's really electrolytes, not so much sugars, that increase the absorption and the cellular utilization of creatine, because creatine can't just get into your cells. It needs a transport protein, like most things in the body. And there's this thing called the creatine receptor transporter, the CRT. And so that transporter to get creatine within your cells, where it can help in the mitochondria and help in the cytosol to make energy, especially when you're exercising, you're thinking intensely, you're using eye health and so forth. Electrolytes like calcium, like sodium, magnesium are really important to getting creatine into your cells. And so it's almost, I think, more important. And this is why there's a lot of research showing these multi-ingredient creatine electrolyte combinations. And this was actually published at one of the studies at my alma mater, Western Washington University, studied the combination of electrolytes with creatine in strength athletes, finding a statistically significant increase in markers of strength, looking at bench press and squat exercises in football players. So, multiple other studies have looked at just creatine and magnesium together, or creatine and just sodium. But, creatine with electrolytes seems to increase the utilization and the synergy between electrolytes and creatine, because creatine also is a osmotically active nutrient, meaning it helps draw water into muscle tissue, which can help resist dehydration. And we also know that electrolytes help with cellular hydration, but they also help with the absorption of creatine. So it really works hand in hand. And this is important for athletes, people who go in the sauna, to not be dehydrated and so forth. During adolescence, there's better preservation of reproductive hormones and so forth. Research shows lower risk of depression and mental health issues in adulthood. And with old age, over the age of 65, not necessarily old, but with people over the age of 65, research shows that cancer can help with reducing frailty and risk of cognitive decline and beyond. So I think that's really important. But what about for women? A lot of guys are pretty cool and comfortable taking creatine, So I think women should consider, a loading phase of 20 grams per day for about a week, followed by 3 to 5 grams per day of a maintenance phase. So I think a lot of people are a little confused here, like how much should I take for maintenance? Is it 10 grams, 20 grams, whatever? Honestly, like 2.5 to 5 grams is sufficient. Research actually shows this. You don't need a whole lot, especially if you're using the 99% purified German creatine, or if you're using electrolytes. Really good thing to consider ongoing maintenance. And then you can periodically dose creatine in supraphysiologic dosages, 10 grams a day, if you have jet lag, or if you have a presentation at work or something, you want to do 20 grams a day to really optimize your mood and mental health. That's important. But right here, creatine, as you can see from this visual from the paper titled Creatine in Women's Health, Bridging the Gap from Menstruation Through Pregnancy to Menopause. Creatine helps with cellular energy production, right here on the page, bioenergetics within the mitochondria, bone density, also calcium balance, mood, and cellular hydration. So that's what's going on here. Now, I think really important to understand that strength is a vital sign, and that's why creatine is so important, especially as you get older, because it can help maintain strength and beyond. But I want to finish up here on sleep loss. I think this was really important. This was a study where the investigators intentionally sleep deprived study subjects, finding that sleep deprivation, of course, is well known to cause cognitive defects within working memory, language, and word retrieval and so forth, and processing speed. But when the study subjects were also concomitantly given 20 grams of creatine during their sleep loss, they were able to offset some of the sleep loss induced changes in cognitive decline. So I think that's important for folks, because there's obviously, periods of our life where we, have sleep issues and so forth. But I do want to finish off on just some of the kind of misconceptions about creatine. We hear a lot that, creatine might cause hair loss and some of these different things. We do have this 12-week randomized controlled trial that was published earlier this year in 2025, titled "Does Creatine Cause Hair Loss?" A 12-week randomized controlled trial, finding that there was no evidence that creatine objectively impacts the health of the hair follicular follicle, and they use all sorts of objective quantification methodological techniques to look at the hair follicle and so forth, finding that there was no negative impact on creatine use versus placebo. In fact, some of the evidence suggests that there was actually an increase in the hair follicular health in the intervention group relative to the control group. So I think that's important to acknowledge as well. So, there was one study in rugby players back in the early 2000s where they took a loading phase of 20 grams of creatine per day, and they were also concomitantly doing exercise, resistance training, and so forth, and they increased strength and performance. And there was an increase in dihydrotestosterone, which is a derivative of testosterone known to negatively impact the hair follicle. But that was more probably just related to the fact that they had a natural bump in DHT because they were exercising more intensely, nothing to do with necessarily the creatine. And we now have several studies showing that's not the case. Also, does creatine cause kidney decline? No. There was one study in an individual with chronic kidney disease from diabetic complications who had a pretty high serum creatinine. And it turns out that he was also taking creatine reportedly, and this was published in the medical literature. This was just literally a one case study. And so the nephrologist reported this and published this case study. And since then, there's been a lot of fear that creatine increases serum creatinine. Now, what can creatine do in terms of negatively impact kidney function is if you're taking cheap, inexpensive, creatine that's synthesized in parts of Asia, it can have high levels of creatinine in it. So of course, if you're ingesting extra creatinine, then that could compromise kidney function, because that's an amine metabolite that needs to be metabolized through the kidneys. And of course, elevated creatinine would suggest compromised kidney function. But, the kidneys actually reabsorb creatine. And so, I really feel confident in recommending creatine and don't think that it's going to compromise kidney function or dramatically increase serum creatinine. So, in conclusion, loading phase could be helpful, especially if you've been a vegan or vegetarian. Getting creatine that's made end to end and is highly purified in Europe compared to that made in Asia, it's probably better. You have micronized versions versus unmicronized versions. The micronized version is more water soluble, more tolerable, has less gastrointestinal issues, and so forth. So that's what I would consider, because it might have a better absorption profile. So folks, again, for creatine options, we have Myoscience, and there's tons of creatine out there, but we source the best in the world and have very competitive pricing and third-party test every single lot. So click the link in the description below if you want to save. You can use the code podcast on that. All sorts of delivery systems and variations to really help you with your health. So there's that. And again, if you want this research, you can go to myoscience.com, opt in for our email newsletter, and I will send you this full text PDF of all the studies that we've been talking about today. I appreciate you tuning all the way to the very end. Hopefully you got some value from this and enjoyed the science that we shared here, and we'll catch you on a future episode down the road.